I've been interviewing people from around the world who, at least in my view, have some wisdom, and we just have a conversation or dialogue about it. I thought would be wonderful, and thanks for doing this. So let me introduce Kathleen. I met her about 3 years ago. We did a session, my wife and I, was premarital counseling, and called me on my stuff immediately. And I found that to be refreshing, that someone objectively could see something and say it without harm. And I thought that was unusual. And then the more I saw in how the work you've done with Leslie and the difference it made, the more I saw wisdom being expressed in her, which I know is a product of spending time with you.
Thank you, Marc. Well, I'm 65 years old, so that's my first credential. And I'm from Detroit, so I've lived to this moment, which is a great accomplishment for me anyway. I eventually went to the University of Michigan for 2 degrees for my bachelor's in general studies in religion and psychology and literature, and then my social work master's degree received in 1983. I've been a student of spiritual development, my own process. I entered psychotherapy out of a life crisis in 1974, a near-death experience, and have been doing psychotherapy, joined the human potential movement that came out of Esalen and bioenergetics and mindfulness and Alan Watts and all of that. I was just in the Midwest version of it, and it changed my life. And well, I don't know who I would be at this time in my life if it weren't for those experiences, and became a student of a spiritual program called the Path Work, which also then moved from bioenergetics to core energetics, and since 1978. So it's been many years of doing my own work and then participating in and then helping others to do their work.
So the conversation is about wisdom, and how would you define wisdom?
Wisdom is the product of experience with reflection, that it's not knowledge, but you need knowledge. It needs to have an integration of the emotional and the spiritual to temper the experience. Otherwise, we're just experiencing instinctually what? The next thing and the next thing, which leads more to reaction rather than a response. So wisdom, you know that somebody, it's like you see the effluence of it. You know that somebody has wisdom when what comes out is a response to the environment and the experience that's been tempered with some reflection. And you can't just have reflection without accumulation of experiences that lead you along the way to debunk your ideas, your mythologies, because we start from a child consciousness. A child's wisdom is more limited in some ways than, let's say, an elder, somebody who's saging at this stage of life or later stages in life, regardless of the rare being that comes in untrammeled and or synthesizes information so quick.
Consciousness is kind of like a woo-woo term out there. And you and I have been working in our various ways on consciousness for our people we work with and ourselves. But I'd like to hear from you how you would define consciousness and how people how do you recommend people start to at least look for expanding their consciousness?
I was looking it up and thinking about what is consciousness. I mean, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, it's know thyself. It's Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. Those are things from Plato and Socrates and all of, throughout time that it was not part of the chic woo-woo consciousness. We could relieve ourselves of the shame of following Platonic principles and Socratic, knowledge. We could probably feel a little better about using the term.
It is the light at the end of the tunnel for me.
Yeah.
So, the better that I understand and know myself, the more capable I am of making better choices with more power. In the domain of wisdom, how do you think you now apply it? Where does it show up for you in life? How does it manifest itself for you?
Doing a slash and burn of the village in my earlier years, when it was less refined, or I was less aware of the collateral damage that my great insight might have. I've learned through really kind of causing pain by being harsh with friends or with family, or, like standing for my truth. It's like standing for one's truth without kindness isn't wisdom. You might be a great commander and mother of dragons, etc., but you're not a ruler. And you have to become sovereign over one's own impulses, sovereign over, like, knowing what your purpose is, know your cause. Like, I'm not just going to throw everything out and start from scratch. I want to grow things up. So it's learning how to speak the truth or not speak the truth. There are times when there's nothing to be said in the moment, be of service. Then you have to really reflect, I think, is this serving me because I can't stand it? Or is it serving them? They don't know that there's something harmful happening.
How does time show up for you now? How does time occur for you? Because wisdom brings something about temporality that I've not been clearly able to articulate.
It's gone faster and it's gone slower. It feels like time is constant. My experience of it is shifting. Like, it just felt like there's just no time left. I have to get things done. There's a certain quickening that I feel at this stage. So how do I want to live my life with what I have left becomes much more apparent now, because I can see with some relief that it's more limited.
In terms of your ability to see what's needed over there, how do you relate that to your wisdom?
I am more aware of not knowing, and that if I'm able to get out of the way of the idea that at this stage or at this thing that people are presenting to me in my counseling practice, that I should know something to do, to offer them a thing, a pithy statement, a reparative experience. I could guide them into some intervention that will, illuminate this. And I used to spend a lot more time figuring that out, doing the body-centered work. I find myself sometimes doing things, experiences, sometimes sitting quietly, waiting for something. But for the most part, the wisdom I find is trusting that even though I may not know, something wiser than me between us, in that mirror resonance between me and their wisdom, not just their suffering, will work together to make something happen without fixing it. Like, there's not the same need to fix it, to get somewhere else. It's like just the pleasure of being right here, even if it's painful, is what we don't afford ourselves, right? We can suffer a little longer in this thing. It'll change. It's okay. People in their 30s and 40s are in a quickening, that's not about the technology. Technology, like consciousness, it would co-opt it. It's like, no, that's not it. the telegraph didn't, it's more than that. It's like, oh, there's so many possibilities. The wonder, the menu is so large and vast that making a choice, it's like what we used to call as attention deficit disorder as something that stood out. If you don't have attention deficit disorder, in a sense, you're not paying attention. There's so many things to take. Wow. I mean, if I just read the paper, which I do now regularly, the Guardian, the Post, and the Times, and then the other things like the Atlantic, I know more suffering than I ever would have known 30 or 40, 20 years ago, right? That it affects me. So then I feel an urgency. And if I'm 30 or 40 and I know that I have a lot to do with the time I have, I got to get on it. But I've already done a bunch of it. So now I have to sit here with the awareness and let it, like that, what is it, that commercial where the guy's hair is flying back because he's listening. Is it Live or Memorex, like the blast of information that's blowing past you. It's like, yeah, I'm just going to have to sit in the storm and pick something.
People of wisdom have more compassion. One gets into looking at wisdom. One sees that wisdom folks, at least my experience of them, is the righteousness disappears. They don't have the same I have to be rightness about themselves.
It's humility, that you've been humbled before those other wise ones that you're standing on the shoulders of, and that you don't have the one answer. In fact, that righteousness or that need to be right is a very dualistic way of being in the world, and it doesn't reflect wisdom.
From my point of view, something about wisdom it's always been available for probably eons, but it doesn't seem to be manifesting itself, particularly in our current manifestation of whatever's going on out there. It doesn't look like there's a lot of wisdom out there. There's not a lot of temperance. There's not a lot of empathy. There's not a lot of compassion.
If we pare it down and look for it, I think wisdom exists. So my challenge to you is to see the abundance of wisdom as it's active in the world, that we may overlook it. There's people living out in the hinterlands all over, but we overlook them because it's a flyover. There's plenty of wisdom. There's plenty of people who feel disenfranchised and are suffering, have had humility thrust upon them. And what have you seen when you see people standing there in their brilliance, in their humility, in their remembering history, not being forgotten? Those are the moments, like the Vietnam War Memorial. These are the people that are in the ground because we made mistakes, and we honor them. What we honor them is by remembering and by knowing that actually when we see these examples around us, they have the wisdom to not start screaming. Sometimes you just have to march and you have to stand. But the suffering brings wisdom. And then you get discretion as to how you must act in accordance with that learning.
When I'm with people of wisdom, I am willing to forego because there's a sense of sanctuary and safety with people of wisdom because they're not after anything.
You're the seeker. This is what's so beautiful. Your seeking brings out the wisdom. It's like you want to have faith in and see it. You want evidence of it. It's like, where is wisdom when I need it? What do? I don't know. So you're asking the questions, and I'm sure I'm not the only one saying, it's there. It's here. It's look under that rock over here, or it's in you.
Wisdom is gestated in conversations of wisdom.
Because we're wiser together.
Right.
The conversation, it's like we really need each other to kind of, is this off, or does this look all right, or what do you think about that? We get better when we talk with each other.